Rockin' Larry Lockin' with Pleiadian Express Productions. Hey, I'm going to do a volume 2 of our Galactic History. If you scroll down on my YouTube channel, you will find Galactic History, a show I did about, mainly that one was pertaining to the Arcturians and them being the first human-like civilization in our galaxy. About a quintillion years ago, I went on to touch upon how they also guided the Lyrans, who fled Lyra to colonize the Pleiades. Now, I was talking about in that one about how the Lyrans had this war with Orion, with the Orion Empire, about a billion years ago, okay? And then once they fled Lyra to colonize the Pleiades, they also had several civil wars amongst their stars, within their star system, which there are thousands of them. There's not just the main 7 to 9 sister suns there. There are thousands upon thousands of civilizations there in all sorts of dimensions, mostly humanoid types, but there are other races there too. So I talked about in that one about how the Arcturians guided the Pleiadians, kind of like the Pleiadians are doing to a lot of Earth humans right now. And that's why I consider myself to have a Pleiadian higher self, but then an Arcturian, like grandparent over self. So I discussed that situation there. In this talk today, volume 2, I'm going to talk a little bit about the Sirius Empire and the Orion Empire, and a little bit of their history and their skirmishes with each other, and as well as a little bit of how they influenced Earth. Now, coming up in another talk I'm going to do, and this one's going to be pretty in-depth, I'm going to talk about how the Sirius star influenced most of our ancient civilizations here on Earth, as well as quite a few of our indigenous cultures. But that'll be for another time. I'm going to start by saying this. Okay, as far as just to touch on that thing with the extraterrestrials influencing Earth. Most work that you see by great writers like Erich von Däniken, Zacharias Sitchin, Robert Valval, Richard Hoagland, people of that nature, they did. Oh, yeah. I forgot another author. I forgot one of the other authors that was influencing this. Well, anyway, Graham Hancock, that's it. Sorry. We know that primitive man here in this incarnation could not have possibly created the Sphinx, could not have created Machu Picchu, Tiamatsu in Mexico, Machu Picchu, things like that. We know that this incarnation of modern man. Now, that's not to say there haven't been other incarnations like Atlantis and Lemuria. They were two high-tech civilizations here that destroyed each other with a nuclear war, with weaponry 3 times what we have now. I believe in the theory of evolution. I believe in Charles Darwin's theory of evolution to a point, but I also believe there's been about 2 to 5 occasions over Earth's millions of year history where our DNA has been given an upgrade. Again, in this incarnation of man here, there's been a jump, because just by evolution alone, we would not be anywhere near close to where we are now without a little bit of help. That's why I've always said creationism and evolution, they're not separate. They kind of go hand in hand. And these were star beings that helped create things like the Sphinx, right? The Sphinx is not just a couple thousand years old. Evidence shows that it's tens of thousands of years old. But what I want to get into tonight, without further ado, is I'd like to get into Sirius and Orion. Like I said, talked about Lyra, Pleiades, and Arcturus last time. Okay, so there were 2 star systems in our galaxy that have influenced mankind's evolution. For this talk, I'm going to talk about these 2. Okay, they have been involved in the development of our solar system for billions of years. The first system was the largest and most powerful. In ancient documents, it's referred to as Orion. Today, we know it as Orion, the Orion constellation. It appears to be billions and billions of years old. Through research, through channeling a mind, through concurring with others, this is kind of how I've came to this, okay? The beings from the star system Orion, and we may be wrong on a little bit of this, okay? It's shaky sometimes, okay? But the Orion star system was populated by the Draco constellation. The Draco constellation got in there billions of years ago and sent in reptiles and snakes and things like that. And they evolved from a one-cell being into a multi-cell being. The difference between the evolution in the star system Orion and the star system, or the planet we call Earth, the difference is, instead of an ape in the evolutionary formula, the Orion star system uses a reptile from Draco, a tiny little, dinosaur-type lizard. That was evil, I must say, just like you might see in Jurassic Park. They brought that into their evolutionary formula and ended up with a humanoid that is a reptilian. And it is a reptilian humanoid in general that populated that star constellation, Orion, that is. Originally, from what I understand, it was a male-oriented society. But in time, the queens, the females, came to power in Orion. And as cold-blooded and ruthless as the warrior kings of Orion were, it appears that the queens were much more devious, much more deadly. It appears there is a galactic truth never disturbed. The female of the species, the Orion star system female, over the billions of years of its history, it turned into the largest, most powerful galactic empire in our neck of the stars, our neck of the woods, you might say. It appears to be known as a star past gateway, as a highway, an interstate of stars that leads from the core of our galaxy to the very outer edges. It follows one of the spiraling arms, and it appears from our research that the name of the star past the gateway is the Pesh Matan. Pesh Matan can be interpreted in Egyptian hieroglyphy, I can't talk, as the ninth passageway. The Orion star system regulated and controlled the ninth passageway, visitors coming in and out of our galaxy, people traveling back and forth through the stars. This star highway, they controlled the star highway by regulating this ninth passageway. The Orion queens, in their ruthlessness, became wealthy beyond their dreams. However, a few billion years later, another star system evolved. This one was populated by a being who evolved from what appears to be a wolfen or a canine type, something like that. That was their type of ancestors. What I'm suggesting to you is that a wolfman humanoid, a canine humanoid, evolved in that star system. It was known from ancient documents as the couscous. That's the root for canine. This star system was named after their military power. They grew in their strength and their might, and they were vicious. They were cruel at the beginning. They were known as the DH, the Dhaka Empire, or the Dhaka Star. To this day, we refer to that star as the Dog Star. It is the star system Sirius. The star system seriously populated by Conus kings, not as evolved as the reptilian beings, but still vicious, still cruel, still primitive by comparison to the Orions at the time. Slowly and surely, they begin to encroach on the ninth passageway. The Orion queens, disturbed and worried, went to the Da Empire. They approached the Syrian kings, and they suggested that perhaps an alliance was in order to be formed between the two star systems. An alliance between the wolfen humanoid beings in Sirius and the reptilian humanoid beings in Orion. Now, they created an empire that is beyond compare. Between the Orion and Sirius star systems, virtually half of the galaxy falls to their control. And that's how it was then. The Orion queens are at the throne at the top. The Sirian kings are the minions at the time. They were faithful. They were loyal servants. But they were powerful in their own right. You have to understand, people. At constellation lore, the stories of how the constellation have been named, and they will find the star system Orion. The Orion constellation is known as the Great Hunter. At its feet are two loyal and faithful dogs, Canis Major and Canis Minor. There is plenty of evidence, I got to tell you, to confirm this very story. We find that in Babylon, Mesopotamia, and even in ancient Egypt, that the pyramids are oriented towards the star Orion and the star Sirius. Now, I know some people think the Pleiades play into this. Maybe they do. Maybe that's the third one of the three pyramids, but one goes to Sirius, one goes to the Orion star system. They're pointed at it on an exact grid. You know what I mean? Exactly in alignment with it. The Sphinx, like I said, is tens of thousands of years old, not just a couple thousand like history would tell you. There are two large chambers inside the Sphinx. One is referred to as the King's Chamber and is oriented towards the star Orion. The smaller one, called the Queen's Chamber, is oriented towards the Sirius star system. Myths and legends in cosmology of the time period seem to be rather confusing, though. If one looks at Orion as the Sirius or Osiris figure, looks at the star system Sirius, the small chamber is oriented towards the female people. I'm going to suggest that there is a very simple error in the research, though, of the larger chamber. It's not the King's Chamber. It is the Queen's Chamber oriented towards Orion, because it is a female reptilian that powers that smaller chamber. It is actually in the smaller chamber, or rather, it is the King's Chamber. That is the one that is oriented towards the star system Sirius. I know it's kind of confusing, which is populated, of course, by the Canis male. These two star systems, when joined forces together, they controlled most of our galaxy for a while. At the outer edge of the ninth passage gateway, known as Pessima 10, another solar system evolved. It was brand new, and this fledgling young star was known as Bod, B-O-D, Bod. This fledgling young star system only had 2 planets to begin with. The dust and stuff, you know what I mean, of creation. The star cooled. Extraordinary large planet formed with one tiny little one rushing next to it. So you had a big giant planet and a small one next to it. The one was between the sun and the planet known as Mumu. In time, another pair of planets evolved between Mumu and this large planet. We will refer to this time as Planet X, or Tiamat, you might say. Okay? These 2 planets would be known as Lamu. You can find this in Babylon creation in their history text. I will suggest also today that we refer to Lamu and Lamu as Mars and Venus. They're twin planets. So think of Mars and Venus as twin planets in the beginning, okay? And that'll tie in later. Another pair of 2 giants were forming together. One suffered tremendous chaos and a lot of disturbance, and it eventually lost some of its size, but in fact gained some rings. We know that planet to be Saturn, of course. And its twin planet that came along with it was Jupiter. And then we had 2 more planets form. That was Uranus and Neptune. The solar system Bod developed at the outer edges of the Pessima. It fell immediately under the jurisdiction of the Sirius star system during that particular empire's reign. The Syrian king at the time decided to exploit this new solar system because new planets mean new resources. It means gold, it means diamonds, it means precious metals, everything you can think of, silver. Settlers, volunteer technicians, you might say, from these solar systems, from Sirius, started building things on planet X, which is Tiamat, and we'll get to that in a bit, how that got destroyed. Colonies were set up all over the solar system, on all these planets that were created and terraformed. Colonies were set up to fleece these places of all their minerals, all their gold, all their precious resources. Okay? And they were there because they wanted to start a new life, basically. But they had to provide the queen, of course, with all these wealthy resources to keep her happy. So it was a situation where people were defecting from where they live. Sound familiar? This happens on Earth too. People want to go somewhere for a better life. And it happened then too. A lot of these people just want to get away because they were disillusioned with how their planet was being run and how their particular neck of the woods was being run. So with all these colonies being set up everywhere, and they were everywhere, they were even on Jupiter, and also again on Tiamat, which no longer exists. Now Tiamat resided between Mars. It resided between Mars and, I believe, Jupiter, I want to say. I'm going to have to, let's see. Okay, so let me go back to that again, all right? Because this is all over the place, okay? This is years of research that I've done and several pages of notes that I've taken, okay? And I'm going to get into the war that did destroy that planet after a little bit, all right? So, again, all these brilliant souls from Sirius were sent all over to colonize, to terraform, to actually create life on these planets, to co-create life, use their DNA. And again, it was for a better life, but they also had to pay the queen back, for being able to leave and start a new life. And basically they were free, but they were enslaved as well. Okay. And it was all about, at the end of the day, still making the queen happy. So what ended up happening was, after all these people defected and whatnot, after these star beings that were all frustrated left, fled Orion and the stars, Sirius star system, they established colonies on the red sands planet and the white sands planet. They established colonies on the moons of the large planet we now call Jupiter, and also that planet known as Tiamat. Planet X, Tiamat, resided between Mars and Jupiter. It was right between the two. It was destroyed, and I'll talk about that later on, and that is what is now known as the asteroid belt. This planet the solar system began to develop. The king of Sirius found himself, this is what happened. The king of Sirius found himself at a difficult point. Okay? He was not happy anymore. He was tired of living like he did. He was tired of living in that empire, basically. And it was a cruel, cold-blooded star system at the time. And he wanted out of there. He wanted to live the rest of his life in peace and not have to deal with it. So he fled to Tiamat. Okay, he set up life on Tiamat with the Queen of Orion, giving him that grace and giving him that permission to do so. But he had to provide her again with all the resources that planet had to offer: the gold, the precious metals, the silver, the diamonds, all of that. It had to go to the queen. Okay, but he was able to settle down there and get away from the crap that was going on in Sirius, and he was able to spend the rest of his life fairly in peace. I mean, he did get a little bit of grief from back home, from the new Syrian king that took up the mantle back in Sirius. Yeah, he managed to kind of avoid that, keep the queen at peace, keep her happy. But he had a grandson. His son died in one of the Star Wars from years back, in one of the many interstellar wars. His grandson was raised on Tiamat. And he took over after his grandfather passed away. After that king passed away, his grandson took over Tiamat. And he always wanted to, he was always kind of angry because he was deprived his rightful spot, so he thought, of being, having the throne of the star system of Sirius. Yeah, he was really disappointed. He really wasn't happy with what he had on Tiamat, and he vowed for revenge. He found himself in control of that star system. Okay, he found himself in control of that star system, and he was able to master warfare in space, in the seas, and on land, on most of these planets in his vicinity. Well, that went on for a while, until what happened was, you had the new Syrian king, and you had the Queen of Orion. Were like, we got to get rid of this guy. Well, the grandson who ran Tiamat wasn't having it. He fought back. He tried to go to war, but it was just too much. It was just too much to fight that Orion Syrian empire, that powerhouse. And what had ended up happening was, his planet was nuked, you might say, with high-tech weaponry, probably 20 times as powerful as the most nuclear weapon the United States possesses. That planet was blown to smithereens. He was killed, and that turned into the asteroid belt. Well, right about that time, too, or not long after, things went south between the Sirius star system and the Orion constellation. They went really south. They started an interstellar war in our galaxy that got really, really nasty. With high-tech weaponry, what you ended up having was, and the only survivors at the time that weren't really completely destroyed were the moon and the earth. Those were the only two bodies that weren't completely destroyed, because Venus and Mars, we'll take those two for a second. Venus and Mars both they were teeming with life, teeming with rivers, lakes, beauty, plants, animals, pyramids, all kinds of great pyramids. They both had their own version of the Sphinx and pyramid cities around them, just like Earth does, just like Egypt does. Okay? But during this war between Sirius and Orion, Jupiter was destroyed. The moons of Jupiter were toast anyway, okay? They were done with. Venus and Mars were toasted. Jupiter, Uranus, Saturn, completely just decimated during this galactic war, all right? And we know this when we research the gases in the atmosphere of Mars. They don't quite fit the theory of a comet hitting them, or, something like that running into them. A asteroid, a comet, whatever you want to call it. Okay, it's just like with the Outback. I don't feel that that was like a comet that hit it. I feel that it was during the Atlantis nuclear war, and Atlantis nuked that part of Lemuria. So I think that's what happened to these planets in space, especially Venus and Mars. And of course, well, Tiamat was blown to hell, and now it's the asteroid belt. But Venus and Mars, for instance, you can tell, and this shows up all over the galaxy to suggest that most of these destructions were not of some natural celestial cause. You find what's called antimatter. Okay, you find antimatter in our solar system. And it really does, when you break it down, it suggests that Mars, Venus, and Tiamat were not destroyed by natural causes. They were destroyed by, being caught in the crossfire of the war between those two empires, and also these two empires at the time just really not giving a damn and just thrashing these places to death. Okay? And again, I'm going to talk about it another time, the Sirian influence on our planet. I'm going to talk about the cultures that they affected, whether it's, I'm going to talk about the Egyptians, the Babylonians, the Sumerians, the Greek, a few more, okay, and their effect on indigenous cultures like the Chinese, like Native Americans, cultures from all over the planet, and how they played into our DNA. Of course, a lot of star systems did. Thankfully, the Pleiadians snuck most of their DNA into us as well, okay, to kind of, so we can get those two helixes plugged back in together, and the 12 DNA strands we have on each side can get back together and work together. But I've got about 18 pages of notes I've got to comb over to go over that one, because that's going to be a big deal. When I talk about that, I'm going to talk about how not only am I going to talk about those civilizations on Earth, right, that they influenced, I'm going to talk about the fact that each one of those civilizations probably had a different collective from the star system Sirius. Some of them were malevolent, some of them were benevolent and good. It just depends. They had different agendas for helping out each culture. And each culture seemed to really worship that Sirius star, so to speak, that dog star, that Canis Major star. They seem to really get into it. And from what I understand, the Sirians are, I've only channeled them a couple times. I mostly do Pleiadians, Lyrans, and sometimes Arcturians. But the Sirians are, on average, about 7 foot tall. If you were to put it in an Earth body, 7 foot tall. Shaven heads, but they look dark skinned, like they could be indigenous on Earth, like they would either be some kind of Native American or some kind of an African tribe, or a little bit of a mix, sort of, because I go into that too, of how they really influenced the Dogon tribe of Central Africa. But so that's what they look like. They were a very, very fierce, very powerful. They were like an indigenous spacefaring civilization. They were like Native Americans with the technology that could go to the moon and travel through the cosmos. Okay. And they had civil wars with each other as well. Sirius A, Sirius B. So you had malevolent and benevolent people from that star system. I think that the benevolent side won during that civil war. The good side won. So it's mostly a peacefaring star system now that's on the side of Pleiades and Arcturus, for sure. But for a long time, it was controlled and ruled by an evil empire. And for a long time, it was split down the middle until they finally completely ascended in the mind too. But long before they ascended in the mind, they were super high tech, could travel all throughout the galaxy. Like I said, through that Passa gateway, through portals, just like the Orion Empire did. And the Orion Empire is kind of getting their stuff together too. They really are. They don't, they're a lot more peaceful now. And keep in mind, they were infiltrated in their beginning by the Dracos. The Dracos brought their snakes and their reptiles there to create that first reptilian humanoid that Orion had. Just like they claim that it was an ape down here in our incarnation. I mean, I'm not, that theory that apes turned into humans, what they're trying to get at, if they're being real, is the first humanoids in this incarnation of Earth. There have been others in this incarnation. They were a primitive caveman looking type, right? And then they evolved. And this happened, like I said, not just through evolution. It happened through some DNA tampering from extraterrestrials. Call them what you want, angels, gods, star beings. Well, we're all God, but, extraterrestrial by definition is something that doesn't originate from this planet. It just doesn't originate from this planet. So whatever your concept is of angels, extraterrestrials, all that stuff, it doesn't originate from this plane, and that's an extraterrestrial. Okay, but I'd say 2 to 5 times, at least 2 times in the million-year evolution of man in this incarnation, we have had some help. We have had a DNA upgrade. In fact, I think we've had a couple in the last century as well, too. I really do. I think the children, and I've mentioned this on other shows, being born in the early 90s, I think they were born with a DNA upgrade. I think females in general that started to be born in the late 1950s, I think they were given a DNA upgrade. And I've got lots of reasons why I think that I'm not going to get into right now here because I've talked too long. But there's a reason why I believe that. And there's a reason why I believe that the kids born in the early 90s overall, say starting about 92, why I believe they had a DNA upgrade when they were born. Okay? And plus, I've seen examples. This is not just something, both these things were channeled to me, of course. But these are things that I have witnessed and studied. And if it's not true, if both those things are not true, then they're both part of 2 of the biggest hell of the coincidences you could ever meet with all the stuff I've ran into and have found out and witnessed. Yeah, and I don't really believe in coincidences, except for the few that just prove the rule. There's an exception to every rule. But they would both be extreme coincidences if it's not true. Because I try to deny it and deny it and deny it, but everywhere I turned when I was researching both over the years, everywhere I turned, I was being proven right. But again, thank you. This talk was a little off because the notes that I took down on my computer, the computer froze up a little bit and I got a little out of my flow, but hopefully this sounds okay and you get the gist of it. And I look forward to putting on that talk about the Sirian influence on our cultures in this country. And again, go ahead and check out the last audio I did, Galactic History Volume 1. Well, it doesn't say Volume 1, but I'll warn you, you'll have to probably put on your earphones or hope that your device goes up way loud because for some reason the audio came out low on it. But if you have headphones, you'll be able to hear it fine. And in that one, like I said, I talk about the Arcturian influence on the Lyrans and on the Pleiadians. All right, rock and lock, and I'm out.